this has got 3 extra steps this time, but it's loading right now. Sorry. Just want to make sure, and we're good. Okay. On that note, all right, everybody, welcome. I assume you all got the agenda and additional reading from earlier this week, or I guess it was late last week. And what I thought we'd do is just go walk through some of that. Mostly, I think the main thrust of this meeting is going to be dealing with the community engagement process, seeing where things are. Then we'll go through a little bit of the demographics, point some things out, see if anybody has any questions about those things, and go forward from there. So probably what I'm going to do, if there's no objections, I'm going to put the old PowerPoint up on here just to get us started. So everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about is, again, the community engagement, the initial draft or preliminary existing conditions, and then next steps. A couple of things, I guess, first on the status of the survey, we've got, as of this morning, there were 45 responses, which is pretty good because I think the cards either have just gone out or are getting ready to go out.
I can share an update there, Peter.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I heard back from Track 7 today that the card is in production and is expected by Tuesday of next week. And so once those are printed, they will be bundled and brought to Muncie for distribution and should be in residences' mailboxes by Friday, June 4th. Eileen at Track 7 confirmed the cost of the postage is 19 cents. It's a bulk mailing, and the confirmation of the number of homes was roughly 3,200. It actually worked out to be a lower number than the estimate, which is a good thing.
Yes, that's great. Good. So any questions about that? So getting ready to launch took a little bit longer than we initially thought, but looks like it's going. And again, we already have 45 responses. And I looked at those briefly and saw that I think it's 24 are people from the village and 21 are people from the town outside the village, which I just thought was kind of interesting. So any other questions about the survey?
I have a question. Is it worth it? So these are going out now. Is it worth it for us to include the QR codes when we're tabling events? Because I'm going to be at the anymore, because this is going out. I'm going to be at the farmers market tabling on the 6th. And then I think it sounded like you got some from the makers market. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. I mean, if anytime anybody wants to take the QR codes out and about,
Okay.
that's, the more the merrier, because it's just increasingly difficult to get as many responses as you'd like in a survey. People are kind of surveyed out all over the world. So.
And you want visitors too, right?
Yeah.
Is that part of it? Okay.
I think it's just good to be able to identify who's who, and if they're answering the survey. And everybody, all 45 that have completed the survey thus far have completed all the questions too, which is a good sign. So we'd be able to know who's who and sort accordingly.
And so, Peter, the first question asks about the residency, right? Village, town, or other. Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you could break down those responses and statistics per group.
Yep, that's correct. So we're good.
Tom, is there any way that I could get a copy of the artwork and also, the other side of the postcard for the village's website and Facebook?
Sure, I have those as PDFs. I'll send you a collection of what I have.
Okay.
Yep.
And is it okay we put it out now, or do you want us to wait until the cards are delivered?
I think it's good to go, right? I think it's just we're waiting on the production of them and
Okay.
and mailing. So.
And it also might strike a familiarity if they see it on our Facebook page, and then when they get it in the mail, they're connecting it. Yeah.
Right. Also, I think, as you know, the school district put something out on their website with a link to the survey.
Great.
And a link to the warwickplan.com site that Peter had put together.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, you might even be worth just putting something like check your mail. You know, this is coming soon, and then to even tighten the connection between what they see on the website or Facebook page, what shows up in the mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
I could also get a copy to send off to the Knights of Columbus, as well as St. Stephen's has a Flocknote website that could put it on as well, I think.
That's great, Jack. Thank you. I'll send it out to the whole group here.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, reactions about the survey? So we are moving forward. The other thing, just to remind everybody that there is, the last question is provide your contact information in exchange for a drawing for Warwick dollars, Warwick cash. Just so we're prepared for that. Okay. So the other thing, in terms of public engagement, I think that's a big step forward, is Bill Springnether from Alta Design was in town with his associate, Kara McKnight, this past week, and we had a tour, and we're able to schedule a public Zoom meeting set for Thursday, the 17th at 7 p.m. That the folks at Alta are going to be putting together. And it's really going to focus on the whole question of pedestrian and bicycle transportation and access and those kinds of issues. But there'll be other opportunities in the course of the meeting to raise other kinds of issues. But that's really going to be the primary focus. And I would see, you know, going forward, we may want to do a second one depending on what the response is and how things emerge. That's more of just kind of a general interest question and answer, concerns and hopes kind of meeting. Any questions about that? Because what I'd like to do, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I was just going to say what I'd like to do, and Carly, this pertains to you also, is to maybe next week sometime just convene the community engagement group just for thoughts about how do we reach folks in terms of, you know, making sure they're aware that this meeting is being held and things of that sort, because you folks were so helpful in getting the survey off and running. I'm going to ask you again to share your expertise and thoughts.
Peter,
okay.
Our senior groups are now meeting again. And those are the folks that are most unlikely to do the survey online. Would it be worth our while to, you know, reach out to them and bring surveys and have them fill it out right then and there?
Sure. I mean, if we think that's the case, yeah, I don't see any reason why not. We could get some copies made and bring them down or send them down or whatever, make sure they get them. Other questions about either the survey or the public meeting that's being scheduled?
Just in terms of the public meeting, I know it's a Zoom meeting in the evening. I was wondering if you had any other kind of information on format, you know, whether it was like the style, whether you're thinking of doing breakouts, like whether just some of the, and the key goals unless you think that we could talk about that during the engagement subgroup. And then the other question is, do we think if this is going to be focused on pedestrian and bicycle
Oops. Yep.
experiences, then, I mean, could it be worth it for us to do some sort of outdoor, like piggyback on one of the events that are happening outdoors in the village in the summer?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to do one of the outdoor events. I was involved in a couple of those in the height of COVID in other places, and the amount of people that showed up was pretty, it was a couple hundred, I think, in both situations. So I think that would be a logical follow-up too, to do the Zoom meeting, again, with a little bit more of a narrow focus on the pedestrian related issues. And then, to do an in-person open air meeting, I think would make a lot of sense. And again, one of the ways that can be done is through a series of posters set up in an area where people can make comments about the topics listed on the posters. I've found that works really well. People, they get it, they know how to respond. And, can be tied into the survey even. So,
Are you hosting the meeting, Peter?
well, I'm going to be there, but it's really Bill Springnether from Alta is going to be the person. I'll kick it off, but they're going to basically run it. And
I see.
One more. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. One more thing. As soon as you have the Zoom, if you could get it to us, we can get the event posted to the Hello Warwick Valley site. And we can promote the event, cross promote,
Great.
but we'll need like the access and stuff, I guess,
Yep.
or however you're doing it. Are you making people pre-register? Or an Eventbrite or something? Because that would be easy for us to just.
I don't know the specific details of that, but it's my understanding that it's not going to require pre-registration. It's just whoever wants to show up.
You have Zoom bomb contingency plans
Well, I mean,
dealt with that.
an invite with the password. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, it's not going to be completely wide open. So I think we're making progress in that regard. Feeling pretty good about that, and also as the level of vaccination increases and the weather improves, I think the opportunities to do more stuff on site is kind of exciting. When we were walking around last week, our little contingent, it turned out we all were vaccinated plus 2 weeks. So we walked around without our masks, which was pretty exciting. So now the other part of this is, we've got the survey going, we're gonna have the public Zoom meeting, some other follow-up meetings. And then the other part of this is also organizing meetings with particular stakeholders. Seniors is a good example. And what I'd like to do now is at least talk about what some of those groups are. And as usual, there we go. And from a previous session we've done, these are some of the groups we talked about being included in sessions. And I think what would be useful is to start to get a handle on the specifics of who are the groups, and when do they meet, and what's the best way to access them. And maybe what we could do is, if we go through this list, and folks could volunteer to say, all right, I'll take, I can deal with the young adults or the merchants in the Chamber of Commerce, or however else we want to define that, to start to get a handle on, all right, who are the groups, how are we going to reach them? And then, the next question is virtual or in place. And my predisposition at this point is, to the extent it can be done safely and demonstrably safely, I'd like to do them in person, but you know, that's going to be up to the groups themselves, obviously. So I guess let's get started. So Mayor Newhart, you had talked about the seniors, the groups are starting to meet in person. And I wonder if that's an opportunity. Oops, sorry. Any thoughts? You know, are there any particular groups of seniors that would be most representative, or?
There's about 3, I think, different senior groups that meet at Town Hall and the Senior Center. So that's probably the easiest to
Yeah.
target.
Is there a coordinator of that? Like
They
someone?
each have a different
Okay.
head, you know.
Yep. So probably, you know, in terms of that, then with those groups, if you could send me the head of each of the 3 groups, maybe that's something I could just reach out to them, see what they'd like to do, and plan that accordingly. So that's seniors. There was discussion about getting teachers involved, doing sessions with teachers, for teachers. Any thoughts about that? About how we want to approach that? Do we want to talk to the teachers to get students involved?
Yeah, so I could I can run with the one with teachers. I haven't figured out exactly how to do that yet. I think everyone's still quite busy with the changes in the school district. So let me think on that a bit. But as far as the children's students, and we do have a number of responses from the middle school art students. Again, they're not in the form of a survey, but it does constitute input.
Yeah, and a question, you know, what's the possibility of getting other input like that? You know, that the student, those drawings, the artwork was great, and it would be really cool to get more of it.
I reached out. I think that my daughter's class is going to do like a writing assignment related to their vision for the future. I think I forwarded that email to you, Peter.
When did you do that?
I'll follow up by chat.
Okay.
Can't remember. But that, so, because they could work it into lessons. It seems like a really good opportunity. So maybe, I wonder, no, Tom, I mean, could it make sense to email some information to the principals and see if they're interested?
I think that makes sense. Yep. I've reached out to Dr. Leach. Still trying to connect with him, but yeah, the individual principals for the various schools, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, but you had reached out to the superintendent, is that?
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear you, Peter.
I'm doing it again. You'd reached out to the superintendent, is that?
Correct. Just to run a few thoughts by him, but yes.
Yeah, because I think that would be the logical way to do it, is to, you know, once there's kind of the district-wide buy-in, then it's a lot easier to reach out to the individual schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been a lot of activity in the school district recently, so I was trying to balance our request,
Yeah.
right, with the knowledge of what's going on with the district.
All right, so yeah, Tom, so then you and Carly, I guess, would follow up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. And also, you're both members of the community engagement subcommittee, so that would be a good way to follow that as well. Another group here, young adults, you know, like the young professionals, families. Any thoughts about a good way to engage those folks?
I posted the survey when it first came out to the parents group,
Mhm.
and I can do that again. I don't know if I lost the link. I can do that again on Facebook. I think also with young adults, maybe some of the gyms might be a good idea. I can reach out to, my family participates in the Henzo Gracie, so I can reach out to them, I guess. I don't know about others. There's also yoga in Lewis Park that happens like 6 days a week. I don't know who goes to yoga out there.
Okay.
Could I comment on the yoga issue?
Sure.
The yoga is carried out through the Historical Society, and the Historical Society could approach all of its affinity groups, including yoga, the archaeological dig, the various committees, and provide them with opportunities. And I think Jack and I can see that that happens.
Right. Yeah, we have 200 and some members as well.
Yeah, we can send it out in an e-blast.
Sure. Put a
Yeah.
link on our website.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what would be good, any sense of how many affinity groups we're talking about?
Well, there's one that preserves cemeteries. There's the archaeological dig, the clothing. 5 or 6, I guess.
Okay. Because what would be great is to set up a session with the affinity groups, and maybe under the aegis of the Historical Society, just to talk about the comprehensive plan, their thoughts, their perspectives. Again, I would see that as an in-person where I would be there and we could have a discussion with that.
Well, Jack and I
Talk
to, we can, let us talk to our executive director and president.
Okay.
I'm sure we can arrange something.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I'm sure we can.
Super. All right, that's the Historical Society. And we've dealt with students. And the other is the BIPOC population, Black, Indigenous people of color in the community. And we had talked previously about reaching out to church groups as at least the first step in that process. And I know the mayor and I are going to talk a bit further about that in terms of who to reach. And
Peter, I know I owe you those contacts, and I will get them to you in the next day or so.
great. And the other is other.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's also a BIPOC Facebook page or website. I'm not that familiar with it. I've heard about it, but maybe other people have seen that.
Okay, yeah, we can track that down. If there's an organization associated with it, get in touch with their leadership and see what the possibilities are. Now the other,
I was
One-
thinking about the children, how about through the little leagues, possibly the coaches and so forth with little leagues, possibly getting some input through there.
my instinct is to try the schools first,
Uh-huh.
just because it's a broader population. We can get more, I think, greater reach. If that doesn't work, then I think the little leagues would be and as a baseball fan, I'm all for that, but we have to make sure we're trying to reach out to everyone equally. Other civic groups or organizations that we need to engage with.
We have two veterans organizations within the community, VFW and American Legion.
Okay. And Barry, can you get me contacts for them?
Sure. And then we have Rotary and Lions.
Okay, so yeah, same. If I get the content, I mean, maybe this could be one session to bring all those groups together for a discussion. And the one that's, still missing that we started to talk about, but we missed is again, the young adults and families. We can get at some of that through parents, but are there any other organizations like, I don't know whether the Chamber of Commerce would be representative of that, or
Yeah, well, we have a small group of young adults at our library, and the community center is another place where they gather and provide services and programs for them. There might be another, if you haven't already identified, Karen Thomas over there as a way to reach out to them. And who is the Wickham Works person, Michael? I keep forgetting her name.
Melissa Strauss-Smith.
Yeah, Melissa works a lot with young adults. They're doing a big, Pride event in June, and she's pulling together various groups there. So she would be a good contact person.
okay.
We do have a young adult person a staff member who does have a list of, contacts with teens. And so maybe she could do something, one of her blasts, to send out or see if there's a way to involve them.
Great, because I'm even, like maybe even 10 years older than that. 25 somethings, 30 somethings.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
That's okay. I'm drifting away from the microphone again.
Uh,
Also thinking about groups that are, let's say, maybe 10 years older than that, like 20.
Oh, yeah, I see. So when you say young adults, you mean 20 to 30-year-olds. See, I think of 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that helps.
Because, anecdotally,
The local cafes are definitely watering holes.
Uh-huh.
I can take the action item to reach out to Wickham Works.
okay.
I'm on the
Great.
board.
Thank you, Carly. Well, let's go back, because that's the other group that's related to this, is the merchants, the downtown folks. And what's the best way to get them? Because even if they're not necessarily all young adults, they're going to have a handle on that market by having served them as well. Is there a downtown business group that meets regularly?
There is a merchants guild, but they are kind of a loose group at this point. They used to be a little bit more structured. I think COVID kind of took some of the wind out of their sails.
Mm-hmm.
They are having a rather large event coming up, which is a sidewalk sale, which would be a good presence for us. And I can get you the date on that. Corinne Ierata, who's part of our committee, is actually the head of the Merchants Guild.
Okay, I'll follow up with her also. I guess she wasn't able to make it tonight, but yeah, that would be good, and to have a presence there, and also maybe this could help re-energize or reconvene the Merchants Guild. At least we can have a session to talk about the comprehensive plan and the future of the village, and just take it from there.
The Chamber of Commerce has been really helpful when I've had to do a Zoom meeting, like with the restaurateurs or specific groups of
Oh, really?
their membership. So that is always a useful door to knock on.
Okay, good. I will get in touch with you. All right, so I think we've got a pretty good start here in terms of groups. Any other thoughts about other folks we might want to reach out to? If not, we can pick them up as we go along, as we learn about different organizations or associations in the process. But so what I'll do is with the notes that I'll send, the meeting summary, I'll reconstruct who was agreed to and hold everybody on task. And again, we'll get these groups together. And thank you for your willingness to take these things on. Any other thoughts about the stakeholders or the community outreach in general? If not, what I'd like to do is just to go briefly through some of the demographics that I threw at you with the agenda last week. I don't know if any of you had a chance to go through those. For the most part, there wasn't anything, I think, earth-shattering in them, but still, there we go.
I didn't receive any files. I looked through my email and I got the agenda, but I didn't get anything else.
Well, the agenda was a PDF.
Oh, now I feel stupid. Yeah, I see a lot more to it.
Yeah, it was a multi-page document, but that's okay. You'll have plenty of time to go through this. I just wanted to give you a sense of what's in there. These are a few of the tables, just starting with the demographic overview. And, a few things to note, absolutely unsurprising. The village population density is much higher than the town or the county. Median age, you can see both 2010 and the 2020 estimate. The village is older than the town and the county as a whole. And you can see that's also reflected in the percentage of population 65 and older, which is now approaching about 25% of the village. Also, I don't know if you saw it, there was an interesting article in this week in the New York Times about the changing demographics globally, but it will affect everybody, that the population is projected globally and in I think just about every region to shrink over the next 20 years in an accelerating process. That is, once you have one cohort that has fewer children, that means the next cohort that comes of age, childbearing age, there'll be fewer of them. If they have fewer children, the process accelerates. So that's the anticipation now, at least over the next decade or so. And it's something I think that's worth considering as we think about planning for the future. That kind of modest growth to even decline is something that's in the air. Just to give you a sense, one of the statistics was in Germany, since the year, I think it was 2002, the government has demolished 300,000 housing units because there's no demand for them, and they've created parkland where these units used to be. So anyway, just to give you a heads up about some hike.
Sorry.
Hey, Peter,
Yes.
I just was curious, since the village is in the town of Warwick, are our numbers reflected in all their numbers then? So it's sort of twice?
Yes, there's double counting. We can net them out if you want to clarify, but the town numbers almost always include the village as well, all the villages. And there's one or two obscure exceptions to that. I can't recall offhand, but generally, like in these numbers, the village numbers are included in the town. Table 2, households. You can see the change in households from 2010 to 2020, a 6% increase for the village, higher than the other jurisdictions included in the table. Average household size, and this may be one of the things that's driving the increase in total households. The average household size is smaller in the village than in the town, county, the New York metro region. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is the population skews older, which means there'd be more households that are two-person households or one-person households among the seniors. But also the housing stock in villages tends to be older than in the town and smaller. And so it lends itself to smaller household size.
Peter, excuse me, we also have a lot of senior citizen housing
Yep.
and 55 and over neighborhoods. So I think that's a big influence. And I was thinking I'm gonna look into it, but I'm pretty sure that most, if not all, of Liberty Green didn't come available for housing until after the 2010 census.
Mhm.
So the significant increase we see from 21.7 to 23.5 is definitely influenced by that. But I'll be able to get you some numbers as to figuring out to what degree that impacted that number.
Okay. Yeah, and that's one of the things to keep in mind as we think about themes for the plan. It could be, is the village going to be a major service center for senior citizens, a major congregation place, and a place where senior citizens look to have their needs met? And I think increasingly we're seeing urban areas, particularly smaller urban areas, serving that role. This is table 3, and it's showing you the demographic view in terms of more housing characteristics. And the major one here is the owner-occupied units. You can see it was the Village of Warwick had about 62% in 2010. The estimate for 2020 is 67%, lower than the town. And that's pretty typical for a more urbanized area, particularly a village. There's going to be a higher number of rental units in those properties. But what's interesting is the growth. The four here at the bottom shows the percent change in the composition of owner-occupied units, and that's an 8% increase, which is that increase from 62% roughly to 67%.
Yeah. So can you, Peter, maybe you can clarify this. So I'm looking at percentage of owner occupied in the top left table, 61.6% to 66.7.
Mhm.
Right. That's a 5.1%, but in table 4, it says 8.3.
Well, it's that's the percentage change in the share. In other words, it's not percentage points, but it's the percentage of 61.6%. It's that additional 5.1 points divided by 61.6 gives you that 8%.
Got it. Thank you.
And that's why part of the reason I included that figure is because I guess I was a little carried away looking at the graphs and wasn't clear enough, I think, in labeling it. That's what that shows, is that the share of owner-occupied housing in the village grew at a greater extent than the share in the other jurisdictions.
Peter,
Yes.
Barry had a very important point. We have an abundance of senior housing. I think it would be helpful if we had an exact count on the number of senior units there are and which of those can be owner occupied and which cannot, because we have both categories.
Yeah. The question is, how do we get the data? Is it possible the building department has it?
Yeah, I'm sure we can come up
Yes.
with it.
Okay, great.
They have it, I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that'll be an interesting, going back to that idea of as seniors become, or as villages become more important to seniors, what do the housing opportunities look like in terms of owner-occupied, renter?
Peter, how do they come up with the information as to the vacant housing units? Is it the ones that they know there's a housing unit there, but they didn't get a response?
I believe, yes. I mean, essentially that's what it is. I tend not to spend a lot of time looking at the vacant housing unit numbers for the census because first of all, the number is so fluid anyway, year to year. And secondly, it's just not, the census just isn't the best instrument for doing that. I mean, even the real property data, the assessment data has errors like that in it because units are described as vacant that are actually seasonal So it's a difficult thing to measure. I think the one thing you can look at is the change in time to get a sense of the direction where things are going. But in terms of exact levels, I've never been real comfortable with just about any measure of vacancy, other than just to give you a sense, is it getting more or less? And like, for example, the 2010 to 2020 for the village, I mean, that's basically unchanged. That's, I don't know exactly what the margin of error would be, but those are well within the margins of error, I'm sure.
I think it would be a lot different if we looked at it right now. At least the houses around me have gone like hotcakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The other thing, yeah, that the world is changing. That the 2020 data here are estimates made by Esri, which are generally pretty good. I've used this data for well over 10 years. But the world has changed so much since just the last 6 months. And we need to keep that in mind. And this has got to be tempered with an understanding anecdotally of what's going on. And each of those has to balance the other. We can't just say, well, the anecdotal stuff is what we need to go by, or the census data or the Esri estimates are what we need to go by.
Peter, in your past work with some other villages and towns, have you ever gotten metrics as input from some of the local real estate agencies? And the reason I ask is because we have a number of prominent ones in town that are leaders in the community that do track some of this data, right? And I'll just give you, you talk anecdotally. I can't speak from 2010 to 2020, right? But I spoke to several people this week who put their house on the market and got multiple offers within 2 days, right? And that's compelling information. Again, if we look at the purpose of a comprehensive plan, among the several purposes, one of them is for people making decisions if they want to either live or invest in a community, right? And real estate trends, I think, could be pretty compelling in this report. So what are your, again, long-winded question here, but what's your experience in including some of this data?
I think what I'm always looking to do is to make sure the data that's included represents or tracks structural changes as opposed to just seasonal fluctuations. And just to give you a sense of that, I'm not sure, and emphasis on the I'm not sure part of this, that that housing market will be as hot a year from now. Once the new normal is established in COVID, I think things will resort themselves out. That the flight in the cities will diminish, I think. And we'll see, they'll still, I think, Warwick will still be a strong housing market just because the fundamentals are so good. The quality of life is so strong. The schools are so good. It's everything that people look for in making a housing decision they can find here, except affordability. So that we could certainly look at the real estate data, but I think the short-term data may not have much to do with what's going to happen long-term in the village. There's going to be a bit of a froth and bubble in the market over the next 6 months, I'm guessing, that will eventually dissipate as the new normal becomes more clear. And I think we saw the same thing with 9/11, to be perfectly honest, that there was a rush. And then as soon as people realized, had a better sense of what the situation was, that initial rush kind of dissipated.
Yeah, I think we have to be very careful because it's boom and bust, and I've seen it, over and over. Like you said, after 9/11, there was tremendous amount of activity and people moving into the Hudson Valley. And that has been growing again over the past number of years. And COVID definitely has left its mark in terms of that. But I just want to, I warn putting too much emphasis on that, only because, like you said, Peter, it's transient. It doesn't last forever. The same thing goes with, the challenge is that once we get this plan in place, there's, when I think back at the past 15 years of the previous plan, and I think about Irene, and I think about Lee, and I think about economic recession, and I think about, just certain fundamental things just dried up and blew away. And then all of a sudden other things were reborn. So it's hard to put the crystal ball into it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And another good example about that whole, I was just talking about the long-term population decline that's being forecast. Without getting too arcane, there were similar forecasts like that heading out of the Great Depression into the Second World War. And, did not anticipate the baby boom happening at all. They just saw slow, stagnant, and even declining growth in the years ahead, so that there can be events that change things. It could be that one of the things that comes out of the aftermath of COVID might be a greater commitment to community and family that could produce a higher birth rate. We'll have to see. But I think my preference is to try to identify what are the structural trends, the things that are long-term and are not likely to fluctuate greatly from year to year, and really look at those. And again, I would see at this point the population, the aging of the population, slow growth in the population, at least regionally and nationally, are important things. Obviously an attractive place like the village of Warwick can beat those trends, but it's going to be harder and harder to do that. And beating the trends might still mean slower growth than in the past.
Well, I think all of this, like everything that we're hearing in this conversation right now, points to the need to focus the plan around resilience and quality of life. And looking, I don't want to jump ahead, but looking at these other data, diversifying the economy to the extent that is possible to enable people to, the quarter of the population that's traveling over 60 minutes to their work, those things have a deleterious effect both on community resilience and quality of life. And so when we focus on those two things, divorced from any trends, that's where I think you have a really strong, comprehensive plan.
Okay, good. Other thoughts? And let's move on to the employment stuff that Carly just raised. I think there's some interesting stuff there. What this shows occupation, employment by occupation. And just to be clear, the occupation data is by place of residence. So this is people that live in the village. This is what they do for work. And I didn't include in this presentation, but there's also data on employment by industry. And those are by place of work. In other words, those are, for the village of Warwick, it's people that work in the village of Warwick, the different industries they're in. The occupation is a little bit more meaningful because this shows what people actually do for work. And without going into a lot of details here, there's, it's slightly skewed towards white collar professions, things like education, management, those kinds of activities. I don't think that should be a surprise, but that does, give you a sense of sort of the flavor of the community, at least from an economic standpoint. The other one, and this is what Carly also just mentioned, I think this isn't a very interesting one. This is commutation data from the Esri Business Analyst based on the American Community Survey. And again, it's looking at folks in the labor force, workers over age 16. There it is, the Village of Warwick, 22%, 21.69% commute over 60 minutes to work. And the average commute time for workers 16 plus is 34.9 minutes. It's a little less than the town and the county as a whole. But that's a pretty substantial, commutation time. It's an hour out of a day is involved is going to and coming from work. So that's, again, I think that does read on the whole question of resiliency and energy consumption and all of those things. So we might want to think about this as we're moving forward and thinking about what the plan needs to address.
Is it possible to get a map of where, you know how there's data that tell you where people are commuting to? Is it possible for us to get one of those visual?
Yep.
It'd be
Yeah,
really, yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. There's a couple of sources. The Census Bureau has a little app called On the Map, which will do that. And then also Esri has some additional information like that. The tricky thing about that, there'll always be a few outliers because it's basically it's done on the day of the census, the day the census was taken. And if someone is going to Scottsdale, Arizona that day for a business trip, that's what shows up. So there's always like 4 people that are going to really outlandish commuting destinations, and you just need to keep that in mind. But it really does, it'll give you a good sense of where people are going and also where they're coming from. We can do the reverse. The people that work in Warwick, where are they coming from commutation? And we'll put that together for a future data dive. And the last one I wanted to share with you is the one this is the big mystery to me. Because the results here are surprising. And for those of you who read it, this is looking now at the state of retail in these different jurisdictions. Because I started just looking at the village and the town and the county, but the results were so strange to me. I then brought together a bunch of other jurisdictions, villages, small cities, to see how they did. And here's the strange thing about this. You'll see in the far right column, there's the retail gap. And that's in one of 2 ways. It's either surplus or leakage. And I'll explain that briefly. That this data looks at the sales by businesses, let's say in the village, in each of the different categories of retail, compared to the purchases by residents in those categories. And if the purchases by residents are greater than the sales by the stores, that's leakage. There's money that's leaving the community that the residents must be spending elsewhere because they're spending the money, but it's not showing up in the local sales data. And if the sales by stores are greater than the spending by residents, that's surplus. Because there's money coming in from somewhere because the stores are selling more stuff than the population is buying. Okay, is everybody clear about what surplus and leakage means?
Yeah, but which one's green and which one's red?
Now, the leakage is green and surplus is red. And that's the thing that confounds me. I was shocked that Warwick, the village shows up with leakage. You know, the tourism attraction, like, you know, with the kind of weekend visitation and summer visitation that the village gets, it just made no sense to me at all that there would be leakage.
This does seem like the data should be checked, right? Because Beacon, you would expect to be the reverse also.
Yep.
I mean, Rhinebeck is, I guess, in line with what you would expect, but what is this? You said the source is Esri?
Yes. And it's data that I've used for a long time, and I've never seen an anomalous result like this. And I'll tell you, I have a theory at this point, because if you look through the analysis, I took 2 or 3 chances to try to figure this out. One of them was to look at the change in daytime population. And that's what this table does. But the other thing I wonder if it's related to has to do with the wealth of the resident population. And I'm not sure this holds for Florida or Greenwood Lake the same way it would hold for the village, but the village of Warwick has a wealthy population. So that the spending data is derived from the National Consumer Expenditure Survey, The results of that are applied to the demographics of a particular place, and that's what's used to project the spending. And it may be that the actual spending by residents in Warwick is lower than what's projected here. And what's driving the higher projection is that the wealth is so much higher that it's assuming the level of consumption is directly proportionate to the level of wealth. And it may be that in fact, people that have money, an unusual high amount of money. I don't want to make this sound like you're comparable to Beverly Hills or something like that. But if there's a higher amount of money in the community, the spending may not go up that same increase from low income to high income, that there may be greater savings, in which case the spending is overstated. And in fact, there might be surplus in the village. It might be attracting money into the village that you don't see right now because the projections of spending by residents might be overstated. I've got to play around and look at that to see what I can figure out about this. But again, this is the first time I've ever run across this where it was that counterintuitive. And you can see the others in this table. Like again, New Paltz is a good example. The village, there's a lot of surplus there. It's a college town, but also it gets a lot of weekend visitation. And again, Rhinebeck, another good one, and Saranac Lake, also a quintessential tourism town and showing a strong surplus. But again, those places in terms of income are not as wealthy as the village. So that may be what's driving this.
I don't know, Peter. Rhinebeck is a very wealthy community.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll look at the data for Rhinebeck and
Yeah.
compare it to the village. But again, I think the larger question is just, what does this mean? Is it just a statistical anomaly? Is there something here that we need to pay attention to? My guess at this point is this is a statistical anomaly. That the truth is what you observe on the ground, and that there's a huge influx of visitors. There's a lot of spending, and that's what drives the local economy, and a lot of the visitor spending matters. Now, if it turns out that we can reach some understanding that this isn't a statistical anomaly, what it suggests is that there might be even greater opportunities for businesses in the village by tapping into the resident population even more. Again, I'm skeptical of that, but I just, could be.
If there's a lot of building going on in the village, which is attracting outside contractors, could that be a factor? People spending to build a home here, but they're not spending it on contractors based here or whatever.
No, because first of all, this pretty much focuses on the retail side of things. It does look at spending in building supply, retail operations, but it doesn't look at spending on contractors per se. It's really, and the other thing, which is sort of the good news and the bad news about this, is it's really based upon an algorithm about the way people spend nationally. And that, again, what Esri has done is they've identified these little subgroups in the population, define the spending patterns for them using the national data. Then they look at the jurisdiction and say, oh, here's how many of these different kinds of groups there are. That means the spending in this community would look like this, based upon the different market segments, those little groups that they've identified from the national data. Without going too far into the weeds, that's the process, and that's the thing that may be misleading about this, is it could be the national trends aren't reflected in what's actually happening locally, that there's less spending by residents overall than what's indicated by this data. But
How about online spending, where they're not buying from local merchants, but they're buying online through companies all around the country?
well, that would still show up as spending by the residents.
I see.
But it wouldn't, and that would make the leakage greater. And that's possible, but it's, I just don't think the use of online spending by the residents of the village of Warwick is going to be dramatically different than, for example, Rhinebeck.
You know,
I think a piece of the leakage is that we don't have a grocery store in the village. So everybody to buy their food has to go someplace else. And food is a big part of everybody's budget. And once we're at the grocery store, there's a liquor store nearby, and there's a dog food store, and there's a tire store, and all kinds of things.
Mhm.
So not having that core grocery in the village has been a problem in my mind for a long time.
Okay.
And there's space for it.
Peter, though, what I don't understand is that business growth since 2010 has been extraordinary. We have more retail and restaurants. I mean, I think there's something like 80 places to eat within the small radius of the downtown. And if parking is an indicator of the amount of use and shoppers that we have, well, that's shown time and time again that parking is an issue. So something seems a little odd, and I don't know what it could be.
Yeah, the next thing I'm going to do is look at the demographic groups that are identified in the village by Esri to get a sense of what those look like. It could be related to the grocery stores not being in the village, but on the other hand, like for example, in New Paltz, the grocery stores are not in the village either, and I don't think they are in Rhinebeck. But what's useful about this, despite its kind of irritating inconsistency, is it forces us to think hard about what's happening in terms of retail in the village, and I think that's worth puzzling about. Whether we can solve exactly why there's leakage versus surplus for the village is almost doesn't matter if we come up with a better understanding of what's happening with retail in the village. And that's where it's going to be useful to talk to merchants, quite honestly.
Yeah, and going back to the grocery store theory, Goshen does not have a food
Grocery
market,
store, right?
True.
and look where they are. And also Goshen doesn't have the density of businesses, the numbers of actual shops and restaurants that the village of Warwick does. That's, I know they have this change in population in the daytime because it's the county seat,
Right.
but I don't think that should be the motivator or how that would change the numbers so dramatically.
Well, it could, if there's an influx of folks coming in, spending the day, they're spending money there every day, that'll make a difference. But again, as you point out, I don't know that it would be so dramatically. It's like 180 degrees different from the village of Warwick, and that's just way overstating, it seems, the retail activity in Goshen versus Warwick. So I would encourage you to puzzle about this. At your leisure to review the data and be interested in your thoughts as we move forward about this, because figuring out the response in terms of encouraging retail and dealing with questions about resiliency and those related things are going to require a pretty solid understanding of what's happening in the village, and this is going to be part of it. Again, it could be just a statistical anomaly, and we'll just have to live with that. But if it can help us better understand what's happening with the local businesses, I think it's worth pondering this stuff. So now that I've got you frustrated and thinking about this. There'll be more, I'll be coming back to you with more data as we go through this. I'm going to look at housing in greater depth as part of the scope of work. I'm also going to be coming back with this, any new understanding I have based upon the composition of the population, income levels, et cetera. So any last questions about this? Any thoughts about data that would be also worth looking at as we puzzle through this?
Well, you know what, I just want to mention one thing. People come into our community and they drive down Maple Avenue or down Oakland Avenue and see these beautiful large homes. And they think that Warwick is like the Beverly Hills. It's very wealthy, old, historic. But the reality is that we have these large senior populations in housing. We also the village is not just those large homes. It's many, many, many small, modest homes and people with modest incomes. So, there's a real, I guess, balance, but I guess we'll find out more as we go along.
Yeah, and it may, this may be related somehow to the senior population. I'm not exactly, I can't say exactly how that would play out, but that's one of the factors that makes the village a little different from some of these other jurisdictions. So stay tuned, I guess. So next steps is we're starting to really get into the outreach to the community stakeholders. Again, I'll come back to you with assignments, and you should feel free to review those, make sure I've got them right. If I've assigned you something you didn't volunteer for or left you off a list that you wanted to do, make sure you let me know about that. Again, the public outreach meeting will be on June 17th in the Zoom format, and I'll be reaching out this week to the community engagement folks, our little committee, to see about getting the word out about that. And as advertised already, we'll be continuing the analyses of mobility, housing, jobs, and so on to get a better understanding of the dynamics of the village and what the opportunities and issues are related to all that. Any other comments, questions, reactions, thoughts? Again, a good discussion this week. Thank you. So how's June 28th for our next committee meeting?
I won't be able to make that.
Okay. Anybody else?
Should be all right.
I'm okay.
So Carl, you're not going to be able to make it?
Oh, it's my daughter's birthday.
Oh, come on.
Oh.
No, that's understandable.
They're tough to hear.
I know, I'm a hard driving guy. All right, so but let's go for the 28th, and in the meantime, probably you're going to be on the engagement subcommittee, so we'll be able to get your expertise through that, and also like all of you, feel free at any time if you read through this stuff, you've got questions or comments, shoot me an email and we can talk it over. All right, anything else before the group today?
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that you've clearly listened to us when we talked about kind of the fact that we wanted to deepen engagement, and we wanted to ensure that folks that wouldn't typically be engaged in processes like this are engaged. And so so far it's been a real pleasure to work with you and to feel listened to, and that feel like this is going to come, we're going to end up with a plan that I think people are going to be proud of.
Oh, well,
Thank you.
Thank you. Just hold me to it. That's all.
We will.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much. And we'll be seeing you on the 28th and some of you before that. And also probably at the public outreach meeting on the 17th. If you can make it, that would be great. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you.
Good night, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you.
You.